This week I'm going to share with you 2 simple tricks that will improve every shot you take. So we are today talking about 2 simple steps that are going to help take your photography from amateur to pro. And this is fundamental stuff. If you're an experienced photographer, this is going to seem really basic to you. And these are things that I do completely unconsciously when I shoot. But I can remember when I was starting out, had my first SLR camera, I was shooting around at home. I can remember that these weren't obvious to me. It would have been great if I could have learned this from somebody. So that's what I'm helping to share with you today. So let's jump into some example photos and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here we have our new little puppy. His name's Dagwood. We've had him for about a week now. And as you can see, he's a very good boy. And this is an example of a bad photo, okay? It's not terrible. And this is how I used to shoot when I first started. There's actually some really good things going for this image. First of all, the lighting is fantastic. So we've got the light coming in from the back. You can see it's illuminating his ears, giving him a nice little edge light. But then we've also got the sky filling in from the left side, giving him this nice soft lighting, which is fantastic. So the light's great, the exposure's great, the contrast is great, sharpness, we're focused perfectly on the dog's face. So I would take photos like this and I think, technically this is good, but I know it doesn't look like a professional photo. I don't know why though. I've done everything right. So what's wrong? So that's what I want to talk to you about today. So the question you got to start with is, what's the narrative of this photo? What is the point of this photo? What are we trying to show? And honestly, all we're trying to show is Dagwood. All we want to show is the puppy, okay? And there's a lot going on in this image which isn't puppy, and to be honest, it's not adding anything to the shot. So we've got all this grass, right? Why are we looking at all this ground? We don't need to see all this ground. All this grass is just distracting, all right? And then we've got all these trees in the back. We've got this fence line. It's not contributing anything to the image. It's just distractions. What we need to do is simplify this image so we can just focus on the subject, all right? And here's the 2 simple steps that we're going to do to fix this photo. And when I say fix the photo, I mean retake the photo. We're not going to fix this in Photoshop, okay? We're going to take the photo again. So the 2 steps are get low, zoom in. This was the bad photo. Let's show the better photo. Here we go. So to me, this is a much better, much more successful image. Let's talk about why. Notice what we've done. We're a lot lower and you might not be able to tell, but we've zoomed in, okay? So let's look at these images side by side. So you can tell that we're lower. You can tell that we're at or below the eye line of the subject. And I think that's really important. That immerses us in the scene with the subject. Whereas this photo here, we're above the puppy, we're looking down on him. So what are we doing there? We're just saying, look, here's the puppy. Whereas this image, we're actually part of the scene. We're actually experiencing him, which is fantastic. We've also zoomed in a lot, and you might not be able to see that so obviously. This photo here, you can tell, the photo on the right, you can tell I was standing maybe 2 or 3 meters away. This photo on the left, however, I'm actually more like 5 or 7 meters away. I'm a lot further away than it looks. But what zooming in does naturally is it blurs the background and it blurs the foreground, okay? So all this grass in the foreground is totally blurred out. It's not distracting anymore. It's actually a nice visual element giving depth to the image rather than being a distraction. And it's not a distraction anymore because it's out of focus. Our eyes naturally won't sit on a part of an image which is out of focus because there's no detail for it to look at. So our eyes will just move across that and therefore it's not distracting, okay? And so much of this image is out of focus. So all our eyes can really do is look at the subject, which is perfect. So we're going straight to Dagwood's face. Maybe our eyes are going to follow over here, look around at this grass, which is in focus here. Maybe we'll have a look at this grass here, but then we're going back to the subject, okay? And there's not really anything else to look at in this shot. So we've isolated the subject, and this is, I think, a fantastic portrait, okay? Whereas this shot here on the right, it's just distraction city. It's a mess, okay? So the important points here are that zooming in makes the foreground and background go out of focus. And I'm shooting on an 85 prime with a 1.8 aperture. So I've got a particularly good depth of field going on here with particularly good bokeh. But even if you're on a kit lens with 4.5 or 5.6 is your maximum aperture, zooming in is still going to drop the foreground and background out of focus. It just naturally happens when you zoom in, okay? So if you've got a zoom lens, maybe a 24 to 70 mil or 24 to 105 mil, zoom right into the 70 mil or the 105, and that's going to give you this beautiful depth of field. And getting down low, I talked about how you want to get down to the subject's eye line or below so that you're part of the image with them. But also the really big thing that we're doing here to simplify the image is you can see on the image on the right, we've got all this ground stretching from the bottom of the frame almost to the top of the frame. It's all ground and we don't want to see the ground, okay? So when you drop down, you compress the ground down to the bottom. It's about a third of the frame now. So we've drastically reduced a hugely boring part of the shot. The ground is pretty much always completely boring. The exception to the rule maybe is drone photography, where you're pretty much solely focusing on the ground. But that's an exception to the rule. Generally, the less ground the better, because it's simply a distracting element, right? And it's boring. So that's one example. Let me quickly show you another. So this is our cat Maisie. Just after I was photographing Dagwood, I saw Maisie sitting on the window. I thought she looked kind of cute. Again, there's a lot of positive points about this photo. Maisie's face and eyes are perfectly in focus. And we've got a good depth of field happening. So I was shooting on 1.4 aperture, so the depth of field is really shallow. You can see that her paws are sharp here, and then immediately we're out of focus. So that's fantastic. But again, we're above her eye line, so we're looking at her, okay? We're not part of the scene with her. And there's also all these distracting elements. These chairs, these bits of timber, the wood frame, they're not contributing anything to the image. They're just distracting. So let's see if we can fix things up. We're going to drop down, we're going to zoom in. And here's the improved photo. I'm not saying this is an award-winning photo, but it's a drastic improvement from the previous one. So again, we've got Maisie's face and eyes nice and sharp and in focus, but we've got so much more of the rest of the photo out of focus. This wood frame here is nice and soft. All of this woodwork of the house in the background is out of focus as well. This chair is still in shot, but it's much reduced from previous, okay? So let's look at the shots side by side. You can see on the previous photo, there was so much chair. So by dropping ourselves down, similarly to the ground in the puppy photo, we've taken all that chair, taking up so much of the frame, and we've just reduced it down to this tiny little corner of the photo. Because we were zooming in, we were able to put a little bit of greenery in the foreground as well, which is fantastic, adds a little splash of color. But really what we've done here is we've cleaned up the photo so much, and all we had to do was change our position in 2 simple steps. Lower ourselves down and zoom in. In this case, I haven't actually zoomed in. What I've done is changed lenses. The image on the right, that was on a 50mm prime, and then I swapped to an 85mm prime, which is more zoomed in. But if you're using a kit lens, zoom it on in. And something that you'll learn or discover over time is that even if your lens isn't fantastic, even if it's an f4 or an f5.6, don't think that you can't get great bokeh and a really small depth of field. You just need to zoom in as much as possible. It has the same effect as opening up your aperture, okay? And I might make another video about this down the line, but if you're shooting a subject at 50mm, say, on, let's say your aperture is 1.2. If you do the same shot with an 85 and you've got them taking up the same amount of real estate in the frame, so your cropping is exactly the same and you're at 1.2 on the 85mm, you're going to have much more bokeh, much more out of focus background and foreground, simply because you're more zoomed in. So don't get too caught up on the f-stops of your lens. I would much prefer an f4 lens which is zoomed in further than a wider lens with a bigger aperture like a 1.2 or something like that, especially for any kind of portraiture. Now, just one final point. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's kind of interesting. All the things that I have been trying to take out of these 2 image examples, the way I got rid of them was I actually got closer to them. So in this photo with Maisie the cat, the chairs were a problem, right? So I actually got closer to them to make them take up less real estate in the image. And with the puppy, the ground was my biggest concern, and the solution was to get closer to the ground to get rid of it. Just an interesting point. So remember, get low, zoom in. I hope those simple tips help you out. I know they've made a big improvement to my photography since discovering them. And remember, if you'd like to keep seeing more content from me, hit like and subscribe, and that will encourage me to do so. See ya.